Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is the second keynote session. It's the first one on day 2. We will cover an important issue for society and research, the economics of mass shooting, and I'm very happy to welcome our speaker, Hasin Yousaf from the University of New South Wales. He is in Sydney. He is a lecturer in economics there. He has studied before in Europe, in Madrid at the Universidad. And his research fields are political economy, public economics, development economics, and of course, economics of conflict and violence. He has published in a few instances on the topic, and I'm happy to see him presenting now. Please, Hasin, start.
Thank you very much, Professor Klaus, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present. It's lovely being here. So today I'm going to talk about something that's unfortunately not very positive. It's about the causes and consequences of mass shootings. In particular, I'm going to focus on the economic part of it and see how there are some economic causes of mass shootings, what are the economic consequences of mass shootings, and what has been studied and what still is open for future research. So before I go in more formal way of looking at what are mass shootings and what are its effects, let me give you an example of what type of events are mass shootings. So this is an example from a recent mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. So it's a small town in Texas. There was a mass shooting on May 24th, 2022, where one of the student, Salvador Ramos, he was 18 years old. He was in this high school. He ended up killing 22 people and injuring 18 others. So this is an example of mass shooting, although this had a lot of deaths. So this mass shooting was the third deadliest mass shooting in the US, the third deadliest school mass shooting in the US. But these are the kind of events that are mass shootings. Now, for audience outside US, mass shootings are luckily and fortunately not that very common. Sadly, we had a mass shooting in last week in Thailand, but those are anomalies. Usually, most of the mass shootings are occurring in US and they are very common. Later on, I'll show you the data, but to get a sense of numbers, on average, even if you define mass shooting as the most conservative way, there are at least 20 mass shootings every year in the US. If you define it according to injuries and a more liberal way, then the mass shootings are more than 100 every year. Now, because these are such common occurrences and potentially could have huge impact on society, it's become an important topic of interest among policymakers and academics. So recently, there have been growing evidence on what are causes and consequences of mass shootings, not only among academics, but also policymakers are trying to understand how can they curb mass shootings and how can they facilitate the rehabilitation of society once mass shootings have occurred. So we are going to today discuss in detail what is the relationship between mass shootings and the economy. We'll see both sides of it. So how economy impacts mass shooting and also mass shootings impact the economy. But mostly we'll focus on the second part, that is, what is the effect of mass shootings on economy. The first part is the evidence in the first part is more shaky. It's not well identified and well established. So that is some avenue of future research on what are the economic causes that lead to mass shootings. By the way, I forgot to mention this before. At any point, if you have any question, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask them. Okay, so let's dig deeper on trying to understand mass shootings. So first, to study anything, we need to first define upfront what are mass shootings. So mass shootings are defined by FBI. So this is an official definition. Basically, they are mass murders that are committed with firearms. So again, for an audience that's outside US, it's difficult to imagine that mass shootings will be so common and mass murders with firearm will be so common, because outside US, access to firearm is not that prevalent. However, one shocking statistic in US is that there are more guns than people or population circulating in the population. Generally, some people have more than one gun, so it's not everybody doesn't have a gun, but the number of guns that are circulating in the country, and these are legally circulating. So illegally, probably this number is going to be higher, but guns that pass the FBI background check are more than number of people living in US. Now, there are different data sources, which we are going to see later on. But what is interesting is that there isn't any consensus across different data sets on how mass shootings are defined. So different data sets use different definitions to define mass shootings. So some of them define them as a different threshold compared to the other. So the most common definition is the following, which is mass shootings are shootings or mass murders committed with firearm leading to 4 or more deaths. And this generally excludes the shooter itself at one location or crime scene. So if there are 4 or more deaths committed by gun or any sort of firearm in a location, that would be characterized as a mass shooting. This is the most common definition. This is the definition which FBI uses. This is the definition that, for example, in congressional research paper, the first definition that they employed was this one. But another common definition that's used, which has another dimension to it. So in the first definition, you are only looking at deaths. So there could be some events or mass shootings where what happens is you end up only having one death, but a lot of people are injured. So the other definition takes that into account. And the other definition says that 4 or more individuals affected by shootings is a definition of mass shooting. So in this case, you could be affected even if you're injured. So if there are 0 deaths, but 4 or more injuries, that will also be characterized as mass shooting. So different sources characterize this differently, and different papers use different definition on characterizing mass shooting.
Hi, Hasin, if I can ask a question, sorry. I think this might be a good time to ask a question. So of course, you know, the definition of mass shooting, as you clarified. So, but what's the threshold between mass shooting and terrorist attack? Because, you know, you're talking about mainly the US, as you said, but there have been events, you know, think about Paris or, you know, across Europe, and now this is accounted in your study. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's a very good question. So there isn't there isn't any separate threshold of deaths that characterizes mass shootings as terrorist attack. It depends on the aim of the perpetrator or aim of the shooter. Generally, so most of these mass shootings are events where the aim of the shooter is not really motivated by either political or religious or any other particular hate. So these are more random acts of violence. But in some cases, some of the mass shootings are or could be characterized as not really terrorists, because that's FBI doesn't characterize them as terrorists. They have to officially declare it, but they characterize it as hate crime or like targeted crime. So instead of having no aim or random act, you are targeting a certain community or certain religion group. So that's what it is. So it depends on context, basically. And so that was a timely question because here we see the different types of mass shootings that are defined by these sources. So the events that you mentioned would most likely fall in public, while in some cases they will fall in felony. So let me go over them and then we'll talk. So most of the mass shootings are public mass shootings, that is, that they occur in public domain. So these are different types of events that occur either in workplaces, schools, restaurants, malls, religious institutes, public institutes, neighborhoods, or other settings. So these are public mass shootings. They have a clear public domain. They are not taking place inside a home or inside or as a part of a crime. They are taking place in a public domain where somebody who is just present there could be affected by it. So if there's a mass shooting in a restaurant, you could be affected by it because you're just happen to be at that restaurant at that time. Then the other big source of mass shootings are feminicide or mass shootings that occur within a household. Generally, these are more acts of domestic violence where these are mostly committed by men who have access to gun, and they end up killing their family, even extended family and friends. And sometimes it spills over to outside the household, but everyone targeted is part of the family. So sometimes there are mass shootings, for example, that occur in public domain. So for example, they occur in a mall, but the shooter wanted to kill their family member. So they are characterized as feminicide mass shootings. Then finally are mass shootings, which are felony mass shootings, and these are related to crime. So any armed robbery or gang violence, which ends up killing 4 or more people, would be characterized as a felony mass shooting. Now, most papers in economics that are recently using mass shootings uses public mass shootings and not the other. And there's a clear advantage of using public mass shootings compared to the other. Public mass shootings are likely to be more random compared to crime-related or domestic violence-related mass shootings. B, it's also the case that public mass shootings are likely to have impact on the economy or impact on the society, because those are events that really affect citizens or society outside the immediate family group or crime network. So if there's a mass shooting in your school, all the kids that are attending that school, all the community members who send their kids to that school are going to be impacted by that, directly or indirectly. Even if they don't, if their family member doesn't die in that mass shooting, they're still impacted through their effect on mental well-being. And we're going to see that later on, that it is in fact true that mass shootings have effect not only on people directly targeted, but also on other community members that are related to them. So what are the main data sources to measure mass shooting? So one of the main sources, the most comprehensive way of measuring mass shootings is FBI supplementary homicide reports. So these are called FBI SHR for short. So this is a very good database that does not only have mass shootings. So this is, as the name suggests, it's a complete homicide report. That is potentially any deaths that occurs in US that's reported to the local agency, so the local police, and that is captured by the FBI in this database. So this, as we can imagine, has a very good characteristic that all the deaths which occur as part of a homicide, so as part of intentionally somebody killing somebody else, is reported in this database. So that opens the door to using FBI data to construct mass shooting using potentially 4 deaths or 3 deaths or 2 deaths. So that is a good way to characterize mass shooting as different number to see whether whatever results you have, they are sensitive to defining mass shootings as 4 deaths, for example. In addition, this database has rich information on both shooter and victim characteristics, which is good and handy to see whether certain group that's targeted, does that mass shooting has a bigger impact than the other, which kind of victims being targeted have a bigger impact on the economy, and so on. Now, one major drawback of this database is that the exact date of the event is not known. So in this database, it's collected. The only information you have about time is month of the event. So you have what was the month in which this mass shooting occurred. And one way to overcome this problem is once you know. So the FBI data has the city and the county of the mass shooting. So once you know the approximate month, number of people killed in this shooting, the city and the county, you can use media and online sources to get a sense of what is the approximate date of this event. Then USA Today is a database that complements the FBI supplementary homicide reports, and the aim of this database was to add shootings which were missing in the FBI supplementary homicide report. So why would some mass shootings be missing in FBI supplementary homicide reports? Because some of the states don't respond, don't submit their homicide reports to the FBI. So a big, now every state does it, but one example is Florida until early 2000s did not submit a supplementary homicide report. So there were no mass shooting characterized in Florida. However, in real world, there were mass shootings occurring in Florida, and USA Today does that exercise and complements the missing mass shootings from FBI supplementary homicide report. Now, this the database, the limitations of this is that it does not contain any information whatsoever on who the shooter was or who the victims were. It only has the location of the shooting and number of deaths. But the advantage of this is that the exact date of event is known. So here you have the exact date of event. Now, another database that goes on a different on a tangential path, instead of getting a comprehensive database, Stanford Mass Shooting Archive, which ended in 2016, so you don't have shootings after that. But the aim of this database was not to have comprehensive list, but limited list of prolific mass shootings and have detailed information on that. This was based on online media reporting. So it used online sources. Whenever mass shootings were reported online, it was captured here, and it collected much more rich information on shooter and victim characteristics than the FBI supplementary homicide report. The exact date is also known. However, the drawback is that it's not a comprehensive list, and it doesn't aim to be comprehensive list. It aims to be a list of mass shootings that are more prolific. Now, before I move on, I'll quickly mention some other data sources which might be of use as well. In particular, the FBI active shooter incident reports are interesting source of shootings, which could be used as potential or failed mass shootings. So here, these FBI active shooter incidents are incidents that are going on in real time, reported to the FBI. And what could end up happening is that this active shooter can end up killing 4 or more people, hence committing a mass shooting, or the person runs away or is stopped by the police, or the FBI arrives on time and the person is apprehended. That could end up as not being a mass shooting if there are less than 4 deaths. So that gives you a sense of what could be potentially failed mass shooting. So this could have been a mass shooting, but either this guy ran away or was apprehended or was killed before by somebody else. And that provides us a sense of potential or failed mass shootings. Now, this, as I mentioned, could come in handy in implementing a more clean identification strategy. So you can think of the following argument that some people may say that counties that have mass shootings are very different from other counties. In practice, that's not the case, but for now, let's make this argument that counties with mass shootings are very different from others. However, these failed mass shooting or potential mass shooting counties, they are going to be much more similar to counties with mass shooting. That gives you an identification strategy where instead of comparing mass shootings to all the counties, you compare mass shootings to only failed counties with failed mass shootings or county with potential mass shootings. Now, there are some other data sources such as as I mentioned earlier, that those that define 4 or more victims instead of deaths. And this is Gun Violence Archive and Mass Shooting Tracker. And similarly, specifically for school shootings, there are 2 databases that only looks at school shooting. And because they look at school shooting, they have much more information on whether students died, whether teachers died, how many students, how many teachers, what were their age, and so on. Okay, so this is the number I mentioned earlier, that mass shootings, how do they look like over time? So even by any conservative standard, if you take the average of this number, it would roughly be 20 mass shootings every year. So it fluctuates a lot in different years. On average, there have been 20 mass shootings. So there was a cyclical decline in the 90s, but since 2000, there have been mass shootings every year. And it's from 2000 onward, it seems to be that there is an upward trend in mass shootings, particularly where this last year in this is 2016. The last FBI supplementary homicide report available, I think, is 2017. So we should be able to get one more data point to see where this number goes. Now, let's quickly look at some economic causes of mass shootings, and we know very little on this part. We have very little systematic research on local causes, especially economic, of mass shootings. So there are some papers outside economics that try to understand motivations for mass shooters, but the evidence on this is less systematic. In fact, this is from Grant Dewey, one of the leading criminologists who studied mass shooting, and he even has 2 books on mass shootings, and he characterizes mass shootings, the causes of mass shootings, as follows. So he says, no one really knows why public mass shooting takes place. So notice here, the emphasis is on public. So we know why felony mass shooting take place. So gang-related or criminal mass shootings, we have an idea. Similarly, mass shootings that occurred inside a family, inside a home, we know why they occurred, those are related to domestic violence. But why do public mass shootings occur? Why does somebody go in a mall and start shooting, or in schools and ends up killing a lot of individuals? We know very little of that. And so this is according to Grant Dewey, that those who blame these events on violent video games and availability of weapons are really missing the mark. So this is according to his analysis. However, there is little empirical evidence whether this is true or not. So it would be interesting to actually see whether, if there are different counties with different access to violent video games, and how are mass shootings in those counties compared to the other. Similarly, the criminology literature tries to focus on shooting factors such as demographic conditions or poor mental health in trying to portray what are the causes of mass shooting. Here, like in terms of demographic conditions, there are certain gender, certain age group that are more likely to commit mass shooting. Similarly, individuals who commit mass shooting, they are more likely to suffer from poor mental health compared to the others. However, you can't really put a cause to it, in the sense that it's not the case that all individuals with poor mental health commit mass shooting. So it's really difficult to draw that causal link between mental health and mass shooting. Similarly, among 2 papers that exist in economics by Pa and co-authors and Papa and co-authors, there is a disagreement whether high unemployment triggers mass shooting or not. So a paper by Pa says that local shocks to unemployment lead to higher mass shootings in the subsequent years. However, this is contested by Papa, who says that there is problem of confounding variables that makes this causal link hard to identify, and hence they control for a lot of factors and say that once you do account for a lot of other factors, there isn't any relationship between unemployment, local unemployment, and mass shooting. So this would be an interesting exercise to do and figure out whether this is true or not in a more systematic way, and include other potentially economic variables than unemployment. Now, a different approach that we did, so I with EBES Brodeur, who's based in Canada, did in our 2020 paper was, instead of looking at whether local characteristics predict mass shootings or not, look at what are the characteristics of mass shooters. So if you look at local characteristics, it's very difficult to predict mass shootings, but maybe something could be learned when we look at local not local characteristic, we look at the shooter characteristics. That is, what is the age group, gender, and different features of these shooters that may help us learn why these shootings occur. Now, if you look at these shooters, what you find is that indeed, it seems to be that there are some underlying economic factors that may lead these shooters to commit mass shootings. For example, shooters are disproportionately more likely to be unemployed or out of labor force compared to the average population. So on average, shooters are employed 42% of the time. So on average, so out of all the shooters, for the employment rate is 42%. In an average population, it's 69%. Similarly, if you look at their features at the time of mass shootings, 40% of them are in some sort of economic distress at the time of shooting. So what does it mean, economic distress? Either they are recently fired, or they are recently crippled from some debt which they have to repay, and they are not able to meet that deadline, and so on. Similarly, other leading factors.
Hasin, can I quickly ask a question with respect to the percentage when you compare the numbers 42 to 69? Is 69 the population average, or is this a similar group comparable to the 42 people?
No, so this is not comparable. So that's a very good question. No, it's not comparable, but it's 69 is the age, is the employment between for population between 15 to 65 years. But yeah, it's not the exact same group. So that would be an interesting number to compare to. I guess this would drop a little bit, but yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. So the other relevant factors that are important in predicting whether these shooters are going to commit mass shooting or not is that there is a higher likelihood of social rejection. So either these people are recently divorced, or they are they have been recently recently lost custody of their kids. So these are the leading factors. And similarly, social failure, school failure, such as just failing a class at school or failing an exam, leads to school shooting. So there are some individual shooter characteristics that there are these local triggers or individual triggers that lead to mass shootings. However, as we know that not everybody who gets social rejection or school failure or is in economic distress commits mass shooting. It's just the fact that these individuals have access to guns, and once they are they are triggered by one of these events, it's more easy for them to commit these acts if they are in this distress. Okay, so let's now look at some evidence on what is the impact of mass shootings on the economy. So these will be a couple of slides where we'll start first from the direct impact of mass shootings. And this is another co-authored paper with EBES Brodeur, where we look at what is the impact of mass shootings on the economy. So we analyze counties where mass shootings occur with respect to counties where they don't occur. And we see that on average, real earnings decrease by 2.4% after mass shootings occur in counties with mass shootings relative to the other. So this 2.4% decrease in real earnings is pretty substantial. So average earning per capita in this data sample, so this data is from 2000 to 2016, is 40 to 45,000. So this represents a loss of almost $1,000 for per person over the year, for each year after mass shootings occur. Similarly, there is a decrease in local employment. The employment decreases by 1.3%. So this effect of 2.4% decrease in real earnings is coming from two factors. So there is this 1.3% decrease in local employment and also 1.1% decrease in real earnings. So there is also decrease in earnings and employment, which leads to overall 2.4% decrease in real earnings per capita. Now, it's at first, if you look at this result, it seems that it's too big, or it doesn't make sense that mass shootings can have such a big impact. But mainly because mass shootings don't lead to a lot of direct destruction. So these numbers are not very different if you look at, for example, terrorist attacks. So if you look at terrorist attacks, the magnitude is 2 times this number on average. So terrorist attacks on average lead to 5% decrease in earnings and around 2.5 to 3% decrease in employment. However, here, because you don't have any direct destruction, there could be other channels that could explain why mass shootings have such a drastic impact on the economy. So among the channels that contribute to having effect on the economy are consumer sentiment. So if mass shootings occur in those counties, people are less pessimistic about their financial future. They want to stop purchase of durable and investment goods in the future. So that has a direct impact on the local economy because people don't want to make that investment, and they are less they're more pessimistic about their future. So there is a decrease in local spending, and as a result, decrease in earnings and employment. Similarly, there is evidence of a decrease in health of labor force. So there isn't any decrease in physical health. The decrease in health comes from decrease in mental health of labor force. So individuals are more likely to take days off. So there is higher prevalence of absenteeism. So people are absent from work, and that may explain why there is a decrease in employment and earnings. So there could be a drop in productivity. Similarly, there is a decrease in house prices in areas where mass shooting occur compared to the other areas. And house prices, since house prices is one of the biggest wealth component of a lot of families, what happens is once house prices go down, that has a wealth effect, and people start spending less, and that has a spillover effect on the economy, on the local economy, by leading to less earnings and employment. Similarly, there are some other papers that look at the impact of mass shootings on the local economy, focusing on the cost of capital. So what is cost of capital? So local governments have to raise capital. So the local municipal bonds or municipal funds that have to be raised locally by the government, they have to pay some yield on that. That is affected by mass shootings, and this is a paper by Chordia, Jiang, and Patty in 2022, and they find evidence that mass shootings decrease the ability of local governments to raise capital. In particular, they lead to an increase in yield due to an increase in expectation of default risk. So these counties don't actually default. So when they look at the default, these counties don't have a higher probability of defaulting or higher actual realized probability of defaulting. However, market or participants who are buying these bonds, they think that these counties are more risky, hence they demand more risk premia by asking an increase in yield. And the authors estimate that this leads to an additional cost of capital on the magnitude of $0.2 million per year. Similarly, Garcia, Lee, and Al-Mahmoud in 2022 studied the impact of local credit markets on borrowing and lending locally. So they look at peer-to-peer lending in counties where mass shooting occur compared to the others. And what they find is that there is increase in interest rate. So people charge higher interest rate in counties where mass shooting occur. And there also is a decrease in loan amount. So people are willing to loan less amount of money compared to counties where mass shootings don't occur. So this is another evidence showing that credit markets are impacted potentially by mass shootings. Similarly, there is evidence on impact on labor, which is one of the main channels why economy is impacted. So how can there be an impact on labor? The impact on labor is mainly through mental health or mental well-being. So Sony and Tekin in 2020 used mass shootings, and they find that mass shooting lead to 27 percentage point decrease in probability of having excellent overall community well-being, and a 13 percentage point decrease in probability of having excellent emotional health. So your emotional health and well-being is affected, which has a direct effect on your productivity. Similarly, Lowy and Galea in 2017, this is a meta-analysis. So they look at all the evidence that's published in public health and looks at what is the impact of mass shootings on mental health. And they find that mass shootings impact a lot of different mental health outcomes, not only on the people who are directly affected, but also on victims, also on people living in that society. So different mental health outcomes are affected, such as PTSS, MD, and GAD. Now, one interesting aspect that is growing, this literature is growing pretty substantially, and there is pretty robust evidence now on this, is that mass shootings also impact human capital accumulation. So what is human capital accumulation impact of mass shooting? It's basically that mass shootings, when they occur in school, they not only impact those people, the students directly in that period, but they are in their early phase of human capital. So they are in their learning phase, and going through mass shooting in that phase has a spillover effect, which keeps with them for the rest of their lives. So for example, Rosen Slatter in 2020, they find that where mass shootings occur within 0 to 5 miles of school shootings, there is an increase of 20% of youth antidepressant use. So this is a pretty stark result, and this number is pretty high compared to areas where mass shooting doesn't occur. And this shows that these youth are trying to overcome this problem by using antidepressants. Similarly, Bardaj, so this is evidence not from US but from Norway, but they find evidence that people who were survivors of mass shooting, so these were people who were at the same time as at the event where shooting occurred, but they were not injured or they didn't die. There was a 0.5 standard deviation lower test score in middle school, 21 percentage point less likely to finish high school, and all of this adds on to later on earning 13% less earnings when they grow up. Similarly, Cabral et al. Find that there is a 0.4 percentage point increase in the share of absent days among students where school shootings occur, a 1.3 percentage point increase in the probability of grade repetition, and $0.1 million lower lifetime earnings per exposed student. So these numbers are substantial if you look at how prevalent mass shootings are in the US. Similarly, Levine and McKnight, they look at students who were impacted by the Newtown school shooting, and they find that those students directly had a decrease in their math and language score by a magnitude of 35 to 18 percentage point. Okay, so this, let me see how much time do I have. Do I have time to go over 2 slides?
Yeah, you have at least 5 minutes. Okay.
Okay, that's good. So another growing evidence is that not only mass shootings impact human capital accumulation, but they also impact in utero human capital accumulation, which is which intuitively makes sense, and which is basically that mothers who are pregnant and though if they happen to be in areas where mass shooting occur, that leads to a poor birth outcome for their newborns. So there is a shift in the distribution of birth weight of newborn children downwards. So the newborn are likely to be of lower birth weight if mothers experience mass shootings during their pregnancy, particularly during second and third trimester of pregnancy. There is an increase in children born below 2,100 and 2,400 and 2,500 grams. So this is paper by Banerjee and Bharti. And most of this evidence is, as I mentioned, in the second and third trimester, and they postulate that this effect is likely coming through taking additional stress, which has an impact on the child's development in utero. Similarly, another paper by Dursan in 2019 finds that probability that the newborn weighs less than 1,500 grams increases by 0.078 percentage point, and a probability of having a premature birth also increases by 0.137 percentage point if mothers experience mass shooting in utero. Finally, there is evidence of mass shootings also on policymaking, which is directly related to how economics works. So there is evidence of exacerbating political polarization among voters and politicians. So this is work I did in 2021, where I found that mass shootings, interestingly, they don't make people converge to one belief about what the gun policy on mass shooting should be. In fact, it polarizes people further. It leads to divergence between Republicans and Democrats. So Republicans, they want to increase access to guns after mass shootings, while Democrats want to decrease access to gun after mass shootings. And this polarization becomes much more once mass shootings occur. Similarly, another evidence that Luca, Malhotra, and Polikin find is similar in this dimension, that they find there is a 15% increase in number of legislation related to gun policy passed after mass shooting. And this 15% of gun legislation proposed are not in the same direction. So if the local legislature, the local state legislature is controlled by Republicans, they want to increase access to guns so people can defend themselves. And the opposite is true when Democrats are controlling the state legislature. Okay, so just to quickly conclude, I went over what are economic causes and consequences of mass shootings. And as you saw, that most of the papers are pretty recent, and there is still a lot of room to grow. And this is a growing field, which much more to be explored. I recently wrote a handbook chapter, and thanks to Klaus for giving me the invitation to write the handbook chapter. You can find details about all these papers that I mentioned in that handbook chapter, which is on my website. So yeah, I'll stop here and happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. First, Mason, for the very instructive and informative talk. It's a very important and sensitive question. You already mentioned the handbook. We have several chapters here at the conference, yes, look into this chapter when you are interested in the topic, and also maybe look in other handbook chapters. Now, are there questions? We still have a few seconds to have some. You can either write in the chat, but better just raise your hands and talk. Let me see. Well, while you are still thinking, I mean, the obvious question people have who are not living in the States, if it's happening more or less in the States, what is the relationship to weapons? Yes, I mean, we Europeans think it's insane to have so many weapons. But that would be one motive. The other is, are people more in the US more unhappy about society and willing to act? I mean, is this another motive? They feel free to do so.
Yeah. So that is a very, very good question, and we don't know. So that's a very good question for future research. So one thing that is clear is that the access to gun is an important reason that is different in US compared to the rest of the world. My conjecture on this would be that US has about the same problems as any other developed world, but the main problem is that if people are frustrated, they have a source of a deadly source that they can, with one click, kill a lot of people. So like having access to AR-15 and semi-automatic weapons, that is just like it doesn't make sense to have access to those weapons in hands of people who are distressed.
Could I make the point more general? I mean, is it an issue of culture? It's the same with another issue which is not directly related, but many people in the US don't want general health insurance. Yes,
right. Yeah.
This is kind of similar in a way. We in Europe we do not understand this because it's kind of a human right to have a general health insurance for everybody. But
yeah,
as you say, well, it's a part of my feeling for freedom, and I want to carry weapons, and I want to to protect myself if I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an important point. Like it has become politicized as well, and like I think the thing that I find really interesting is that it's really difficult to break this link. Like Republican voters and I guess politicians as well believe truly that they need more good guys with guns compared to bad guys with guns. So the solution to mass shootings or solution to protecting yourself is to have guns or semi-automatic or strong, like much more quicker guns, and that's their like. So I'm puzzled by that kind of logic, and yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Is there any further remark or comment from the audience? I'm sure people will read your chapter. It's very nice to read. I can confirm that, and follows the style of the presentation. So then we have to thank Hasin very much for coming to us and deliver this speech. And for the conference participants, we have about half an hour now lunch break, and then we will reconvene at 12:30. Thank you very much.